there's a really quite crazy, insane possibility that, the UAE, which is a desert with almost no water, could actually end up being a food exporter as a result of this as well, which I think is super exciting for the Emiratis to sort of have that sort of shift in mentality from being a massive food importer to actually being able to export some of the products to other European markets, for example, as well. So a lot of the European market at the moment is dominated by, imports, which are air freighted during the winter months. And so this is something, yet again, which we could actually, potentially be participating in as well, especially since, the Emirates are a fantastic logistical hub. And so with great airports and freight capacity all around the world. So that becomes an interesting development for us as well.
So Tristan Fisher, CEO of Fisher Farms, thank you so much for round 2 on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So I'll direct the listeners and the viewers to that episode. We'll make sure that's in the show notes so they can get the origin story. So we don't have to do too much of a deep dive there. But just remind everyone where home is for you.
So we are based in Britain, in the UK, and Fisher Farms has 3 sites now. So we've got Farm 1, which is just north of Birmingham, which is a 3,200 square meter vertical farm, which is mainly our research and development farm now. And then we have Farm 2, which is just west of Norwich in England, or east of Cambridge. And that is a 25,000 square meter growing surface area farm, which makes it one of the largest vertical farms in the world. And then we have a factory near Birmingham Airport, with about 35 minutes away from Farm 1, where we have a factory building our next generation modular vertical farms, which are using shipping containers to be the building blocks, almost like Lego, of large vertical farms. So it's a different from sort of a freight farm shipping container story, which is very much sort of individual units. It's much more of using that structure to create large vertical farms, but in a very, very modular fashion. But we can talk about that.
For sure. So last time we spoke, I think Farm 2 was just under construction. So let's start there. Like, bring us up to speed what's happened since then. And it's a big jump from the size of Farm 1 to Farm 2.
Yeah, so I think it's a fascinating process, actually, going from 3,200 square meters to 25,000 square meters. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all. And we had a number of issues. And it's a sort of an interesting one about size and how you scale. And so the good news is that now it's working very well. But it took us 18 months or so to build, but about 24 months to fix. And it wasn't that we went into the project not knowing anything about what we wanted to do and stuff like that. And we actually planned a huge amount of our processes. We had a good understanding of what we were going to do. Our software, we had a very good understanding about automation. We actually, created an entire automated harvesting, seeding, washing line at Farm 1, just to practice about what we would do at Farm 2. We built new versions of our building, which was a sort of different type of construction material out in Farm 1 as well. So we had a lot of things which we planned and thought of. And I think that if you have 1,000 things which need to get right, I think we probably planned for about 900 of them and got them right. And we got those right. And then once Farm 2 got running, 50 of them were relatively quick to fix. And then we probably had, a good sort of 35 or so, which were harder but doable. But there were a few items which actually ended up being very, very difficult. So to sort of some examples, we used the software for Farm 1 to Farm 2, which kind of makes sense. But because Farm 2 is so much bigger, we had a whole bunch of software issues which were unexpected. So, for example, we had a whole conveyor system, and our bench trays, which we sort of grabbed out of our tunnels and took them onto a big robot onto a conveyor system. As they went along the conveyor system, there were a whole series of sensors, and the sensor would say stop, and the tray would just continue going. And we were like, why are you continue going? You know, its sensor is saying stop, that we can see from the logs that it's actually seeing that it's there. But the
Yeah.
problem was that there were so many movements were taking place at the time that the computer wasn't fast enough to calculate all of the movements. And so it said stop. And then the CPU basically is churning his mind. Okay. Then finally it would stop, but a little
Yeah.
bit too late. And so sometimes we'd have, bench trays just falling off the edge of the conveyor system because they just hadn't stopped in time. We had other issues whereby, so if you just to sort of get your head around the sort of the layout out of the system, imagine a long corridor, it's a 100-meter long corridor, and then on the side, left-hand side and the right-hand side of the corridor are 20 tunnels, 10 on each side, 10 on the other side, and there are these big yellow doors which open. And we have an automated storage retrieval unit which goes along, and the door automatically opens. The arm reaches out, grabs the tray, and pulls the tray onto the robot, down, and then onto the conveyor belt, and goes all the way around. And so we did a full-scale test of this in our factory. And so we had, each one of the tunnels was actually 40 meters long. So it's a long
Hmm.
tunnel. So we
Yeah.
did a 20-meter dummy tunnel with the robot going to in front of the 20-meter tunnel. And first of all, we did a 5-year test. So we basically said, if you are cycling through all these trays over 5 years, what the result going to be? And so we did a 5-year test. It was like absolutely fantastic. I thought, wow, this is great. And then I said, let's do a 20-year test. And so after about year 7, the simulated year 7, all the bench trays, the aluminium bench trays, literally started to fall apart.
Mm.
And so we ended up having to redesign the trays. We did different welding. We changed all our wheels. And then after that, we then did the 20-year test, and the test was perfect. And I
Okay.
remember thinking, of all the things that I need to worry about, this is not on that list. And so when we got to build Farm 2, we built the automated storage retrieval unit, went in, picked up all the trays from the first tunnel. Perfect. Absolutely thrilled. This is just great. No problems here. And then it moved along to the next location. And then all of a sudden, problems started to happen.
Mm.
And it took us a long time to actually figure out what the problem was. But essentially, what had happened was that although the floor of the corridor was flat, it wasn't flat, 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 which basically meant that because it's a 40-meter high robot, which is about 3 meters wide,
Okay.
if you were plus 2 millimeters on one side and minus 2 millimeters on the other side, so like a tiny, tiny variance, by the time you got to the top of the system, the grabber arms which went out to grab the trays were a fraction of a second off center.
Mm.
And so you
Yeah.
grab the tray and one would grab slightly earlier, which would cause a twisting motion. And so as you twisted, it would rip the trays apart, and we'd have, plants and substrate and water just sort of gushing down and falling all over the place. And so yet again, it's one of these things which, you did the testing, you were really happy about that. So that was problems. We also had issues, we were building it during COVID. So we had
Yeah.
issues, for example, on a lot of our computer chips, which we needed, which were generally being used in the car industry. And you may remember people weren't able to buy cars because none of these chips were available. So we got hit by things like that as well. So what's interesting about Farm 2 is that it was very big, took a long time to sort of actually identify the problems. And sometimes we had a problem hiding behind another problem. So we think we had the problem and then we'd fix that problem, but we didn't realize there was actually another problem hiding behind that. And so we thought, we fixed this problem. This is all great. But actually, we
Yeah.
discovered nothing at the end of it. So anyway, we finally figured out all the issues. We got great run time, uptime now, producing fantastic crop and products, which are mainly short leafy green things, salads and herbs, out of Farm 2, are going to a lot of the food service industry. So a lot of restaurants, pub chains, Michelin star restaurants. So it's like really, really
Okay.
high quality. And so, we're very, very happy about what's going on there. But we also came to the conclusion that building these very, very large buildings had an inherent risk associated with them. And the risk was that as we went on an international basis, even if we use exactly the same design, we would always go to a country and we'd use a different main contractor different subcontractors, and
Mm,
they would all interpret what we had chosen in our plans in a slightly different way. And it
yeah.
then became clear that if you were slightly different, you could actually end up with projects which were significantly over budget and delayed as a result of this. And so by going back to the modular system, effectively what we've got now is Lego building blocks. And so we've got
Mhm.
some building blocks which are growing blocks, some building blocks are welfare units, some building blocks are irrigation blocks, some are corridor blocks, some are blocks where we can put harvesting and seeding and washing machines in there. And so we've got lots of different types of these Lego building blocks, which we can build in our factory, so we can do the quality control, the quality assurance in the factory. And because they are ISO, International Shipping Organization standard containers, we can send them anywhere in the world. And so this
Okay.
becomes really interesting because we now have people who have reached out to us and said, this is amazing, we're really interested in this. And what we've discovered in this process is that other vertical farm companies have come to us and said, you know what? You are cheaper than what we can build internally.
Mm,
Maybe we'd be using you guys to actually do our expansion as well. And so that's becoming a very, very interesting sort of market for us, is actually working with other vertical farm businesses. And they essentially have the benefit of an organization which knows what a really big farm is and how you
yeah.
operate a really, really big vertical farm, but also has gone through the learning curve of what to avoid and what to actually do at a price point which is basically fantastic.
That's an amazing update, and it's such a dedication to quality and a commitment to ensuring that you're thinking long term about the sustainability and the lasting impact of your farm and all the moving parts that are required to make this work. And so it's fascinating to hear how you were piecemealing all these different scenarios and then understanding, looking out that 20-year window, because obviously you're thinking about as people are using your technology and your kit, you know, thinking ahead, to and figuring out how much of an investment this is for them on the upfront side, being conscious of, looking out for them. And I'm wondering, Tristan, where does this mindset or this approach come? Is it an amalgamation of just like the brain power you have on the team, or is this just something like an ethos that, Fisher Farms carries in thinking through how you build things?
I think the various things. So first of all, I've spent 25 years in a whole range of different clean energy technologies. So I've
Okay.
done a lot of solar farms, including working on actually the construction of a factory making solar panels. There's years and years ago when I was working with Shell Renewables, doing a joint venture with Saint-Gobain, building a solar factory making thin film solar panels. So I've gone from literally making factories and how factories are designed to create these modular systems in the solar side. I've done a lot of solar projects, a lot of wind projects. In my previous company, Lumicity, we built 179 biomass packaged plant rooms. And these biomass packaged plant rooms are a very similar footprint and size to our grow modules that we have for Fisher Farms, slightly more complicated than what we have at Fisher Farms, but we built 179 of them in a 6-month period of time. And that, yet again, sort of got me used to sort of looking at things from a modular basis. And what we saw out of that was that the first packaged plant rooms we built were taking like sort of 5 days to build, and 4 days to build, and 3 days to build. And eventually they took us about 2 days to build these units as you just got better and better at looking at these and becoming more efficient. And the design which we have now allows us to also go into other people's supply chains and really, on a global basis. So we don't just necessarily procure from the UK. We actually can look at various items and say, okay, well, who in the world can actually provide us this item or that item, a really good price point? And so what's happening is that we can really see the costs of these systems go down. And we think there's a lot of scope for them to go down even further than where they are now. And that's part of the, yet again, the sort of the overall ethos of Fisher Farms, is that Fisher Farms wasn't set up in order to grow salads and herbs, which is what we're doing at the moment. So Fisher Farms was fundamentally created to look at a problem that I was increasingly conscious of from my clean energy and renewable energy space. And
Okay.
so I was looking at climate change and how we can have renewables and clean energy in order to combat climate change. And then in my biomass packaged plant room project, which I just mentioned, 179 of those, that was providing heating systems to the chicken and the turkey sector. And that got me looking at food. And then as I saw the food crisis come emerging, which is more people, more middle class, so bigger demand, but then less quality land becoming available because a lot of urban developments which are taking place. So some of the best farmlands in the world in places like China and India have been taken over now with new mega cities.
Yeah.
So you've got land scarcity issues, but you also have problems associated with water. So like 40% of all farms around the world have water stress. 25% of all farms around the world use underground aquifer water, of which all of that water will probably be gone in about 20 years. So
Mm.
I can see these really significant problems that, if they weren't solved, were bad on its own, but climate change has made everything worse. And so Fisher Farms was set up to say, okay, what can we do to develop a technology which allows us to grow staple crops like rice and wheat, and then protein crops like soy and peas? And so Fisher Farm was designed for that. And so then the question is like, well, can we today grow rice and wheat and soy and peas at a price point which is competitive to field grown crops? And the answer is no, not even close. But you've got to start somewhere. And so our phase one crops are, what we're growing now, which are the sort of short leafy greens, the salads, the herbs, the microgreens, which are sort of typical of most vertical farms. Our phase two crops are fruity things. So, we started to go in that market now. So we've got dwarf tomatoes and strawberries, which we're doing research and development on, getting our cost base. But then fundamentally, it's all about the final ones. And in order to be able to get to that final one, there needs to be dramatic cost reductions in terms of the cost per meter squared for growing. There also needs to be cost reductions in terms of the price of electricity. So more renewables, more batteries. And then you also need to have more efficiency in terms of heating and ventilation and air conditioning systems, your HVAC systems. And with all those things together, taking a little bit here, a little bit there, you actually get to a point where you can grow those products at a price point which is competitive with field grown crops. Still not today. I think that it's probably 15 years out, maybe slightly longer. But given the fact that some of my early battery projects were $10,000 a kilowatt hour and now are $65 a kilowatt hour, so 10,000 to 65, and I've seen sort of enormous reductions in cost for the wind projects and for solar projects. I think that if you have certain design which is factory based, where you're actually building these things in a factory at scale, you can get to do some really interesting things. And so at Fisher Farms, we've hired people who have factory experience. So we've got our two key guys running our technology factory come from the car industry, the automobile industry, and they've actually built factories in addition to actually running lines. So it's like, how do you have a design which is really, really focused on delivering low cost? And I think that's probably, from a sort of mentality perspective, quite different for Fisher Farms and many other players in the vertical farming space, who are very much looking at vertical farming as a premium product, and they're talking about the great stuff that vertical farming does. And vertical farm produces high quality crops. They just do. They're more nutritious. They've got a longer shelf life. They've got less air miles, to travel. So vertical farming deserves to be a premium product. And a lot of companies are putting branding around that to show that it's a great product. But we're looking at it a very different way. We're basically saying, if you're a premium product, you're always going to be a niche product, because nobody actually has that much money to spend on premium products, premium anything. But they do have money to spend on boring, bulk-based products of whatever category it is. So there are not that many, Bugattis which are sold, but there are, a lot of, VWs, which are sold. So, you need to know what it is. And so our view is that if we focus on really driving down cost, then we don't have to worry about becoming a premium brand or anything like that. But it gets us in the direction where we want to be, which is, how do you actually feed the world without trashing the planet at the same time? And that fundamental ethos of what Fisher Farms is all about.
Yeah, I love that explanation. Thanks for sharing that. You also, I understand you've been able to drive down the cost per kilowatt hour as well. Can you talk a little bit about that exercise and what that looks like for you now?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. So our We've had several generations now of our lights. So we developed our own lights. We originally bought lights off the shelf from, some of the big suppliers out there. And, they were great lights and we were very happy with those lights, but they were always very, very expensive. And so our lights now are probably 10% of the cost of our original lights in terms of capital cost.
Okay.
And so we've gone from 100 units, we're now down to about 10 units. And we've also made big improvements in terms of our efficiency as well. So if our efficiency was 100 units to start with, we're probably about 60 units now. So there's a nice big drop in terms of the efficiency that we've got, and also a significant improvement in terms of the capital cost of those lights as well. And we're still seeing improvements with our lights. We've also changed the type of lighting that we had. So if you look at our very first farm, the lights are very purple, which is like a lot of the players. And there was a view that you didn't need the green in the lights. And we've actually introduced some of that back in and now. So our lights look, more like natural light. They've still got, more red and blue and less green than actual sunlight, but they look like a regular white-ish light today. So that's been an interesting change.
So when you look at the market and how other people's expenses are, maybe they're not doing the same things that Fisher Farms is doing, how does it compare when you look at costs and when people are considering the OpEx and CapEx costs for running these farms? It seems like that's been a consideration of yours from day one.
In the UK is a strange place to be developing a vertical farm. And it's a strange place because our electricity prices are really insanely high. The big change in pricing really has happened over the last few years as well. So when we originally designed Farm 2, our weighted average price for electricity was supposed to be 10p a kilowatt hour, which is slightly more expensive than what we were paying at Farm 1 at the time. And that was a combination of buying from the grid and also buying from solar farm. And now at Farm 2, we're paying 22p a kilowatt hour rather than 10. And so the UK is very expensive from an electricity perspective. And if you've got something which is very, very expensive, it means you really, really need to work hard to reduce the amount of that expensive thing which you use. And I think that is an interesting one for us because I think that we're probably more efficient than many other players out there in the market. You don't have to worry so much about electricity because their pricing of electricity is, well less than half of what we have to pay. So in the United States, you're around the sort of 6 or 7 cents a kilowatt hour, which is significantly cheaper than what we're paying in the UK. So I think efficiency, I think, is something which has been important to us. And then clearly, the capital cost is something which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And where we are on the capital cost in the meter squared is that we're basically getting now to a point where we are at the high end of a glass house cost.
Okay.
And this is an interesting one for us because, last year there was about $52 billion of capital expenditure on glass houses. So that's a big market. So for us to be able to actually now have pricing, which is now sort of getting into that zone, it's very, very interesting because it means that our addressable market starts to shift. So it's not just sort of short leafy green things, but is also acting as a nursery for other glass houses. So, if you are, doing tomatoes or bell peppers or aubergines, eggplants, and those kinds of products, cucumbers, they all start off as a baby plant and then they get put out into a glasshouse and a hydroponics glasshouse. And so we are now having our pricing, which is capable of actually being the nursery for those areas. So we've had a number of good discussions with that. We've had great discussions with people who are growing trees. So saplings is another interesting area for us as well. So and we've also had discussions with people who are growing salads in glasshouses, but they need a nursery room as well. So by having a vertically farmed zone before it goes into the main glasshouse, it means that the glass is much more effectively used for growing large plants. And also, what happens in the glass house is highly dependent on the quality of the plants which went into the glass house in the first place.
Yeah, makes sense.
If you have plants which are grown in a really great environment, then you can get better yield in the actual glasshouse, whether it's for whatever plant you're doing. So you can get more strawberries or more tomatoes or more, cucumbers or more whatever in your glasshouse by actually starting off on a good point. So that's been a very interesting additional sort of area which we've been looking at in the market. So it's more food linked. And as I said before, we can see how our price point for our capital, cost per meter squared, will drop to a point where we'll be well within the sort of the mid-range of glasshouses in a relatively short period of time. A lot of it's to do with economies of scale. So basically, the more we do, the cheaper we can buy various different components to make the overall project costs for ourselves and for our customers cheaper as well.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of that hybridization approach of glasshouses partnering with vertical farming, and I think the approach you just outlined makes a lot of sense. When you see leveraging the strengths of both sides efficiently, I think is really the future of that partnership, and so it's exciting to see progress there. Can you talk a little bit about Fisher Farms technology? How that was, what the intention there is? I know you're building up the team. You recently announced the John Mayer joining as your sales director as well. So talk a little about that project.
Yeah, so Fisher Farms technology is based out of Birmingham, near Birmingham Airport, and we have a dedicated facility there. And essentially, we have a number of different components to that system. So we've got a core component is our trolley, and on our trolley we have our watering system, we have our lights, a lot of our electrics are on that, and then there are 8 trolleys which will then go into a modular shipping container. And then we have multiples of those. And so our facility there allows us to assemble and manufacture all the various different components which we need for that system. And we got the keys for the building in May this year. And, if you come around at some point, you can see on the factory floor a whole range of containers which are in various different parts of being pulled together. And for our system, a lot of initially we're going to be eating our own dog food, and so we're sending them out to Abu Dhabi to be growing plants and products there, but also then to other players out there on the market as well. So the Fisher Farms technology has been great, and as you pointed out, we brought in John Mayer, who was one of the founders and key directors and head of the commercial director at Bomb Group, which is one of the largest and most successful glasshouse manufacturers in the world. And so it's been great to have his experience. And it's also been great to be able to, sense check, where we are in terms of pricing and the quality in the system like that. So having somebody who actually has been doing that for years and years and years, who understands the industry, inside out, for him to go along to our system, actually, this is worth getting out of retirement for. And he was super excited about, having access to another type of technology, something complementary to where he has come from. But it also means that, when I'm having discussions with people about pricing, things like that, I have a pretty good understanding now of where we are relative to the market, which if you're not an insider, you won't necessarily know. So we now have some, inside knowledge on that, which has been great to have.
So where do you see the potential for growth with Fisher Farms technology? With, what are the possibilities there? And have you thought out, what's that roadmap look like?
So we have a whole series of internal targets. Those targets are, I'm not quite sure whether I've just lost you.
Yeah, still here. I'm just switching the camera, so you can continue.
Yeah. So at Fisher Farms Technology, we have a whole series of targets of how many units we want to be able to produce over the next few years. And, so we know where we want to go. Some of those units are going to be for ourselves, for our own consumption. As I said, quite a lot of interest from existing vertical farming businesses to actually see whether we can grow on their behalf. And so we've got some good discussions going there. And also, looking at various other different markets. So clearly we're in Abu Dhabi now, and we think that's an interesting market for us to grow in. And one of the reasons why is because the cost of electricity there is just crazy low compared to what we're currently paying in the UK. So, in the UK, we are at 22p a kilowatt hour. In Abu Dhabi, we're at 1p a kilowatt hour for our electricity. So if you've got a combination of, being the cheapest large scale vertical farm cost base in the world, plus in terms of the capital cost, plus really almost free electricity, that then starts to create some very interesting opportunities. And there's a really quite crazy, insane possibility that the UAE, which is a desert with almost no water, could actually end up being a food exporter as a result of this as well, which I think is super exciting for the Emiratis to sort of have that sort of shift in mentality from being a massive food importer to actually being able to export some of the products to other European markets, for example, as well. So a lot of the European market at the moment is dominated by imports which are air freighted during the winter months, and so this is something yet again which we could actually potentially be participating in as well, especially since the Emirates are a fantastic logistical hub, and so with great airports and freight capacity all around the world. So that becomes an interesting development for us as well.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of promise in the UAE, and especially with the price per kilowatt hour at 1p, it seems to open up a lot of possibilities for partnerships there. Do you find the timeline for getting projects off the ground there to be the same, longer, shorter? I know that, I've had conversations with other folks who've had projects in motion there that haven't panned out. And I don't know if it's the same across all the UAE countries, but I'm curious what your experience has been.
So I think this is actually a really interesting point. One of the issues about building a vertical farm normally is that it's a big construction project, and which takes time to design, takes time to implement, takes time to raise the money to actually do it. And you've got to make sure that you've got an off-taker who actually wants to buy the product. So you need to know what you're selling, what's the price that you're selling that product at, and what's the volume and what kind of contracts you're going to be able to have. And because we have a modular system, we're not stuck in the build a massive facility and hope mentality that you get with big vertical farms, which then require lots of money to come from it. So we're in a situation now where we can start small, grow, delight customers, and then they say, "Ooh, wow, I want more," and then we can just ship more units. And then they go, "Wow, this is great." And they say, "How much more capacity do you want?" "Well, we want another X number of tons per week." Well, then we'll send more containers. And because we can build the systems quite quickly, we actually can then send those units in a way where our ability to grow actually grows as our customer demand grows. And so we don't get ahead of ourselves in terms of construction and therefore having a lot of capital out the door for prolonged periods of time. And at some point, the ideal scenario is for us to have negative working capital. And by what I mean by that is that we should be able to build our systems and pay our suppliers after we actually get paid for the units which are going out the door and actually start to generate revenue from them, because we can build them so quickly. So that becomes super interesting in terms of expansion. And it's great for all customers who use our systems. So we're in a sort of interesting situation in Abu Dhabi now where we've got customers lined up for our first system which is out there, and we have other people who say, well, once you've shown it and we like the product, then we want to have stuff as well. And so that then allows you to grow into that market rather than having a big project with hoping that people come. And I think that's basically where most of the vertical farming industry has been, and they've had to be that way because they're looking at big buildings, and by not having a big building, it just gives us the flexibility and it gives our customers the flexibility. And we're also in a situation where we can offer different types of solutions for people. So it could be that some people say, you know what, just sell us basil. And other people will say, actually, we want to buy your units or rent your units, and we will own them, and then we'll just have a tolling arrangement in place whereby either we'll grow it in your systems or you can grow it for us, but we'll just do it at a fixed price. So what your revenues are, and we can just choose what we want to do in our system. So there's that kind of flexibility. And it means now that we are able to look at cooperating with most people. So we're not looking at other vertical farms and say, no, you're a competitor to us. We're actually looking at the vertical farms and say, you are one of our customers. You are one of our
Mm.
target markets. And, they benefit from the fact that, we're one of the largest vertical farms in the world. We've got more growing experience than most people. And we have a cheap system which they can deploy, and then they can gradually build up their capacity. And also they can also go into different markets quite quickly. So for example, if you're trying to, you're in the US and you've currently got, one vertical farm or two vertical farms, and you want to be able to expand into many cities quite quickly, you can go with us and we can actually send, 10 units, 10 grow containers to one city, and then 10 to another city, 10 to another city. And if you're not getting great results, you just pick them up and move them to the place where you're actually getting a better customer feedback. So instead of being stuck in a location, you can just basically say, okay, clearly Seattle's not working for us. Let's move from Seattle and San Diego. Here we come. Or you get to a situation where electricity prices in California are going crazy high. And so, okay, I'm going to move over the border into Canada and get lower cost electricity there from hydropower. So it's an interesting that flexibility is something which is relatively unheard of in the industry. It's pretty
I love
exciting.
it. Yeah, it is very exciting. I love that approach, especially like the plug and play opportunities you have in this modular approach. And you wouldn't have the ability if things hadn't been working out in a specific region to pick up a whole factory and move it. It's
Totally
just
insane, completely insane, totally unheard of. And if you look at the US market, there's a lot of people who are doing sort of the microgreen space. And microgreens are things which really want to be fast and close to the customer. You don't want them to really be traveling any distance at all. And
yeah.
because they're so efficient, these are high margin sort of products. Having multiple microgreen factories all over the place near your target market is something which is very easy for us to do. But and it's worth noting that our cost structure scales really nicely. So a lot of systems are very, very expensive at small, and then they
Yeah.
get cheaper and cheaper, cheaper, cheaper as you get bigger. Well, we are actually cheap at small and medium and large. Yeah. Because we're all modular. So it's like whether there's one container or 10 containers, 100 containers, it's still the container. And so it doesn't really matter. So that scaling approach, where you don't have to build a really big facility and just hope that you're going to get it filled, you can have a much more nimble structure. And as I said, you can build, you can go to 10 cities and have 10 containers each city, and then realize that actually 3 of them are terrible markets, and just pull those containers out and reallocate them to somewhere else.
Very smart. And I'm sure that anyone who's considering a new project would be keen on partnering with you, especially in their conversations with investors in terms of like the investment in equipment. And a lot of times, the investors have that as a big concern and understanding how they're going to recoup, their investment in the project. And I think speaking to it as a modular approach that's flexible and can, turn, on the conditions that are in that market. I think that's another selling point for some of these projects to get off the ground.
It's also worth noting that as when you're starting out for these kind of modular systems, because each container is identical to the other container, once you know how to do it in one container, you know how to do it in 10 or 100 or 1,000.
Yeah.
And this is very different from scaling of a big farm. So in a big farm, when you go from 3,000 square meters, where we were, to 25,000 square meters, the additional complexity about growing in a bigger space, although you think everything is the same, they're not. Your water works differently. Your substrate interaction with the trays works differently. Your lights work differently, and the airflows work completely different. Your humidity, your temperature, all those things are quite different. Whereas in our system, you get it right with one container. That's it. You're done. It's the same recipe, same everything for every other container which you do, because they're all exactly the same. And so you don't have to. One of the questions investors have is like, how do you scale? How do you know that if I go from one size to another size, you're not going to make a mistake? And then with our
Yeah.
system, basically, I've proven it with one, and therefore it's exactly the same for 10 or 100 or 1,000. And that is, yet again, the mindset is very similar to a solar farm. So a solar farm, starts off with a solar panel. Solar panel is 380 watts to 540 watts. Those are your sort of ranges of the solar panels now. And there's a fixed size. And if you put one of those, it's 340 watts or 540 watts, whatever it is. And if you have 10 of them, it's 5,400 watts. It's like, that's what it is. And you put them on a different string and then have an array. And so there's some sort of interface between them, but fundamentally, you know exactly what you're going to get. And that's the same thing with our system. So if you know that one grow container, you know, is 96 meters squared of growing space and has these characteristics, then if you have, you know, 10 of them, you got 960 meters squared of growing space, 109,600 meters of growing space. So all of those things are super scalable, and you learn once and repeat rather than having to relearn every single time. And yet again, you know, if I look at my experience in the wind industry, you know, the wind industry scaled in two different axes. So one was, if you say, you know, have a 1 megawatt wind turbine, you could go from a 1 megawatt turbine and have 10 1 megawatt turbines to create a 10 megawatt farm, or you can go from a 1 megawatt turbine to a 10 megawatt turbine. Now, going from 1 megawatt to 10 megawatt is extraordinarily difficult. Well, at least it was extraordinarily difficult to do and highly risky. But going from 1 to 10 to get to 10 megawatts is actually really, really well understood. And it's that kind of mindset that we have at Fisher Farms. It's like using a design motif that worked and got costs down dramatically in the wind and the solar and the battery storage areas in particular. I think is very much what we're focused on in the organization.
I love that model. It's so interesting that it's modular. And from a training perspective, like you said, once you've learned on one, you can learn in the others. And I could see in the future as these farms start to get rolled out and there's either consultants you work with or team members that you work with, I could see almost like a Fisher Farms technology certified person who's had experience with this and could sort of build a business around like, hey, we know these farms, we've done them across the country. So if you've got a project that's Fisher Farms tech related, then, you know, we could get it up and running, you know, in a shorter period of time than having to train people from scratch.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. We'll have to copy that one. Thank you.
Yeah, have someone be Fisher Farms technology certified, you know, and that could be a label.
That's a great idea. But it's also, you know, the other things we're thinking about is that you can add the sort of the Fisher Farms inside. So we're very, very keen on the co-branding side. You know, it's like, you know, if you are, you know, X, you know, vertical farm co, you know, and it was like, and then you got Fisher Farms on the inside, and you can be really great at your branding. And so, you know, this basically says you don't have to be an expert in all domains. You can be really, really good at branding, really good at customers, in the same way that, you know, a farmer doesn't actually have to build their own tractor. They don't have to build their own combine harvester. You know, you're not expecting them to be fully vertically integrated. They're just to do one part really, really well. And so I think a lot of businesses who are fantastic, amazing at branding, amazing at getting things done. And so they can focus on the part which they're really, really good at. And we can focus on the part which we're good at, which is basically providing them a really, really high value, low cost system so they make more money and they don't have to worry about the technology risk, and they can just get on with all the stuff which they're good at and making their customers totally delighted.
I like that approach. Speaking of certification, you were recently granted the BRCGS certification as well.
Yeah, so Fisher Farms, you know, in the UK market, there's a whole series of different certifications you need in order to be able to sell food and stuff like that. And we have, you know, we score extremely highly on that. And it's an interesting one where, you know, the more I understand about the overall food industry, the more I discover that the Fisher Farms quality and standard is so massively greater than a regular field. And it sort of feels like an obvious thing to say, but it's actually more shocking just how good we are in terms of quality than the rest of the sort of conventional land-based systems are. So no, we're very pleased about that. And, you know, we've got a great team. Now, I think Fisher Farms has been very lucky, and that we've managed to attract and retain some really, really great people within the organization. And, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, they've done really great things for the business.
I imagine that changes the way retailers view Fisher Farms as well.
So retailers, when we were originally looking at this, you know, the retailers, I think, gave us a pretty hard time about what they wanted. And I think they were almost like trying to raise the overall standard of everything and using the way of actually driving that up. But no, I think retailers realize now that, you know, how we do things, how our processes work are really, really great from a food standard, food health, food safety perspective. You know, we've done a really good job.
Congrats on the BBC interview. I saw that as well.
Thank you.
I believe the role of vertical farming in the UK in terms of food security. So can you talk a little bit of what that experience was like?
Yeah, so I mean, we've had quite a few of guys out there, from, ranging from the BBC a few times now. Sky News has been around to us as well, and it's always fun. And it's sort of one of these strange ones where I'll sort of get a text message, in the morning, from friends and say, "Oh, I heard you on Radio 4," which is the sort of the go-to news radio outlet here in the UK for sort of talk and thoughtful inspection and stuff like that. So no, it's been really fun. It's been fun getting that. And I think it's great for the team to actually also hear that people are talking about Fisher Farms, not just in our own small community, but actually out there in the real world as well. And, but it is an interesting story, and what Fisher Farms is doing, and very much is a sort of the future of food. And I think, a lot of people have opinions about things like this. And so it becomes topical as well.
I think in one of our past interviews, one of the CEOs mentioned that I think because of the podcast or because he was working on vertical farming, his kids now thought he was working on something cool.
Yeah, well, my kids are doing pretty cool stuff. I've got quite a few kids, and they're all doing some fun stuff as well.
So last time, Tristan, you spoke beautifully about creating a culture where bad ideas combine into great ones. And I'm wondering how that culture has scaled as your team and your global ambitions have grown.
Yeah, I mean, it is always it's a fascinating one. No, we now have, our sort of values that are, plastered all over the wall and things like that. And, yet again, for sort of your listeners' perspective, they'll sort of four core values plus a fifth. So we got sort of two soft values, and one of them is kindness. And so the idea is that let's just be kind to each other. And and kindness doesn't have to be a massive thing. It can be literally, saying please and saying thank you and opening the door and can I get you a cup of tea? And I think the one thing which people forget is that, whilst we are colleagues and employees and workers and all that kind of stuff, we are actually individual people who have the life cycle of what it is to be a human being. And so some of us will be having, parents who may be dying, or problems with our spouses. Somebody might be getting divorced, or they have problems with their teenage kids or their young kids, or they're not sleeping because of the baby or whatever like that. And so I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that we are much more rounded individuals than the person you see working with you. And we have feelings and thoughts. And so just being kind to people goes a long way. And it's surprising how not kind a lot of people are, how rude they are, or selfish they are, or they don't consider these kind of things. So kindness, I think, is an important one. The other one we have is respect. And respect isn't that you get respect, because you have no agency over that. It's like, but you respect other people, and you respect their time, you respect their effort, and make sure that you are, if somebody says, I have to have a deadline at this particular moment, are you going to do anything with that information? Or are you going to just sit on it for another few days? In which case, maybe you need to get that deadline as sharply, as quickly as you needed it. So kindness and respect are the sort of the soft sides. But we also have factfulness as one of the hard ones. And fact is just tell the truth as it really is. And sometimes people aren't lying, but they're putting things in a way which are where they'd like them to be. So, for example, the number is 5. Well, the number will be 5 if certain things happen, but they're not 5 now. They're actually 4 now. And so, but if I'm counting on you to tell me what's the reality, I need to know that it's 4 now. And you can tell me that if these things happen, it will be 5. And that's great. That's also factful. That's the part of the factfulness. I need to understand what's going on. But don't say it's 5 when it actually is 4. And so, just being honest with ourselves, I think, is really important. The other one is robustness. So the idea is that we can't always be nice. Yeah, we can't always be respectful. Sometimes we get our numbers wrong. Sometimes, people just had a bad day. And what we don't want to do is an organization where people are running around on eggshells, wondering, oh, what are they going to, if I say something the slightly wrong way, how are they going to react to that? So I think there's a level of just, suck it up and be robust. And so people can have conversations where they disagree with you. And sometimes they'll disagree with you quite strongly, hopefully in a kind way, hopefully in a respectful way. But we can't actually always be that. And I think the key thing about these values is that they're not where we are at. We're not like 10 out of 10 in all these values. They're much more of a destination. These are a journey which we all want everyone. And Some of us are going to be more kind than others. Some are going to be more factful than some are more robust than others. But you just want to have those as a destination. And the idea is that those 4 values then help the 5th one, which is the critical one, which is the sort of the innovation side. And what we are doing is at the absolute cutting edge of technology. And because of that, we don't actually know what we're doing. And it sounds like a sort of crazy statement, like, how can you say you don't know what you're doing? But no, if we knew what we were doing, we would have the answer already. I would today be the lowest cost. I would be cheaper than a glass house today. Yeah, that's what I would be. But I'm not, which means that I'm not there yet, which means that I need to do things, which means that I need to have an organization whereby people are putting ideas out which they don't really know the answer to. And what we want is my terrible idea and a genuinely bad idea and your crazy, insane idea and somebody else's, drug-addled idea or sleep-addled idea, whatever it is. And they're all actually genuinely bad ideas independently. But by putting those ideas together, layering those ideas on top, we come up with a beautiful, brilliant insight, which none of us independently had thought about. And if we have a culture where we're rude to each other, or mean to each other, or we're lying to each other, or we're flaky and we're worried about what people will think, and you say something in a slightly weird way, and then I get really upset, then we're not going to put those ideas on the table, and we're never going to put the ideas on the table. And because if you slap me down for my bad idea, and I'll never give you a good idea. I'll never give you any idea again because I'll be self-censoring on those ideas. And so by having a mentality where it's like somebody has something and say, how do you build on this idea? I'm not saying this is a great idea at all, but this is something which we can build on. And we have found that. We found that a lot of our great insights have come from just adding to those ideas. And as a result of that, it's very difficult for somebody to say, that's my idea. Because it's not. It's like, I've taken a little bit of that idea. I've taken a little bit of your idea. I've taken a little bit of my idea. And we've added them together and create a new idea. And so there's a much greater sense of ownership of the overall collective idea, because it's not really anybody's idea in particular. Some person might be the person who said it, but they said it because somebody else had promoted or thought about these things, or they've taken 4 or 5 different other things together and to come up with other things. So I think sort of the innovation, I think, is good. You need to do innovation in a safe way. And, another way of thinking about it is that, if you're trying to find where the edge of a cliff is in the fog, in the dark, you don't go to a guy and say, walk in that direction. And when you scream, I will know where the edge of the cliff is. What you want to do is you want to tie them up with a rope, attach them to some strong point, and then you get them to walk off. And then they go, ah! But now you know where the edge is, and you just pull them back out. And then they say, I've now found the edge. And then you walk off another direction, and you literally fall off the edge of the cliff, but then you get pulled back in again. But the edge of the cliff is the edge of knowledge. And if you basically are frightened about getting to the edge of the cliff, you never go as far as you could do as an organization. You never go like, okay, this is what the next level is, because you're always frightened of failure. So you've actually got to go to the edge, fail, and then get pulled back. And now, this is the new truth. And as a result of that, you can come up with a cheaper, better, faster way of doing things than you would have been able to before, but you're safe. And so these core values, the kindness, respect, the robustness, the factfulness, combined together, create this culture which allows us to do things, which is one of the reasons why we are the lowest cost vertical farm in the world.
I couldn't think of a better bow to put on this conversation than to just kind of summarize those amazing values. Very inspiring. And I'm sure any business leader who's listening in any industry would be keen to kind of follow that model. And it seems like you've built an environment and a culture where everyone is supporting each other and pushing each other and challenging each other. And I think that speaks volumes to where you are today. So I really appreciate you coming back on, Tristan, and then sharing the journey. And it's so exciting to see how much progress you've made and innovation you've made, and likely due to all these values with Fisher Farms. I'm really grateful for where this is headed for you. And this idea of the modular farms really feels like it has a lot of momentum. And I think it will allow people to play in the spaces where they excel, whether it's the marketing side and just allowing you to bring in the expertise on the production side. So lots of good things happening, and I'm really grateful for the update.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time, and keep up the good work.
And so we'll have all the links to contact you and the team in the show notes, and wishing the best of success. What do you have planned for conferences coming up?
I've actually gone through a lot of conferences the last few months. So I've been in Germany a few times, been in the Netherlands a few times, Middle East a few times. So my next batch is going to be probably sometime in January. So I have a bit of a break at the moment.
Okay. Either hopefully me or someone from the team will get to connect with you as well. I appreciate your time.
Excellent. Okay, good luck. Thank you very much.